The sky above Earth turned dark that morning. Not from clouds or storms, but from ships. Hundreds of them. They appeared without warning. Massive vessels that blocked out the sun over major cities across the planet. People stopped in the streets and stared upward, their phones falling silent as fear spread like wildfire. Admiral Jake Patterson stood in the command center beneath Geneva, watching the displays that tracked every alien ship. His jaw was tight, his hands clasped behind his back. He had fought for the Zedrax Empire before, seen their cruelty firsthand. Now they had come to Earth, and he knew exactly what that meant. The doors to the command center burst open. President Marcus Webb strode in, his face pale but his steps steady. Behind him came Ambassador Kira Volkov and Dr. Linda Chang, the scientist who had spent the last decade working on projects so secret that even most government officials did not know they existed. One of the largest ships began broadcasting. The massive screen in the command center flickered to life, showing the face of Commander Prextall. He was Zedrax, with gray skin that looked like stone and eyes that glowed faintly red. When he spoke, his voice came through in perfect English, translated by technology humanity barely understood. The message was simple and brutal. The Zedrax Empire demanded 10 million human soldiers to fight in their wars. They also wanted half of all antimatter that Earth could produce for the next 100 years. Commander Prextall delivered these demands as if he were reading a grocery list. To him, humanity was nothing. Just another weak species that existed to serve the Empire. President Webb listened to the entire message without speaking. When it ended, he turned to Admiral Patterson. His voice was quiet but firm. They needed to call an emergency meeting of the Terran Council immediately. Within 2 hours, leaders from every nation on Earth gathered in the council chambers. Some appeared in person, others through holographic projection. The room buzzed with frightened voices. Some council members argued for immediate surrender. What choice did they have? The Empire had weapons that could crack planets open like eggs. Others shouted that they would rather die fighting than become slaves. President Webb raised his hand for silence. He turned to Admiral Patterson and asked him to explain their options. The Admiral stood and the room fell quiet. Everyone knew his reputation. He had served the Empire once, before Earth had any choice in the matter. He knew how they thought, how they fought. Patterson began speaking in a measured tone. He told them that the Empire saw Earth as weak. They had been taking resources and soldiers from humanity for 70 years. Every year the demands grew larger. If they gave the Empire what they wanted now, the Empire would just come back next year asking for more. It would never end. Eventually there would be nothing left of humanity but bones and ashes. A council member from Brazil stood up, his voice shaking. He asked what Patterson proposed they do instead. Fight with what? Earth's military was nothing compared to the Empire's fleets. They had been part of the galactic community for decades and learned one terrible truth. The Zedrax Empire was unstoppable. That was when Dr. Linda Chang stepped forward. She carried a small device in her hand, no bigger than a remote control. She pressed a button, and the center of the council chamber lit up with a holographic display. What appeared made several council members gasp out loud. The hologram showed the solar system. Scattered throughout it were dozens of points of light. They orbited Mars. They hid in the asteroid belt. They circled Saturn's rings. Dr. Chang explained that these were weapons platforms. She called them the Prometheus Array. Humanity had been building them in secret for 10 years, ever since they had managed to steal and reverse engineer some Imperial technology. The weapons worked differently than anything the Empire used. They fired beams of concentrated energy that existed in multiple dimensions at once. The targeting systems used quantum entanglement, which meant they could hit a target before conventional sensors even detected the attack. In simple terms, these weapons were faster than anything the Empire had. The council chamber erupted in debate. Some people were excited. Others were terrified. Having secret weapons was one thing. Using them against the most powerful empire in the galaxy was another. If they fought and lost, the Empire would not just take resources. They would make an example of Earth. They would turn the entire planet into a warning to other species about what happened when you defied them. President Webb called for order. He looked around the room at faces from every continent, every culture on Earth. Then he spoke. He said that 70 years ago, humanity had made first contact with aliens and learned they were not alone in the universe. They had also learned that the universe was not a kind place. The galaxy was ruled by tyrants who saw other species as tools to be used and discarded. For 7 decades, Earth had bowed its head and obeyed. They had sent their children to fight in wars they did not understand. They had handed over resources while their own people struggled. They had done everything the Empire demanded, hoping that cooperation would keep them safe. But safety built on submission was not safety at all. It was just a slower form of dying. The president's voice grew stronger. He said it was time to make a choice, not just for themselves, but for every human who would come after them. They could surrender now and guarantee their children would grow up as slaves. Or they could stand up and fight even knowing they might lose. At least if they fought, they would die as free people. The vote took 3 hours. In the end, it was nearly unanimous. Earth would refuse the Empire's demands. Ambassador Volkov was given the task of delivering humanity's response. She was nervous but determined. She had spent years negotiating with alien species, and she knew how to project strength even when she felt afraid. The next morning, Ambassador Volkov stood before a camera in the council chambers. Her message was broadcast not just to the Imperial fleet but to the entire galaxy. Anyone with a receiver could hear what she said. She spoke clearly and without hesitation. She announced that Earth rejected the Empire's demands. Furthermore, she declared that Terran space was now sovereign territory. Any Imperial vessel that entered the solar system without permission would be considered hostile. Such vessels would be destroyed without further warning. She did not threaten. She did not plead. She simply stated facts and waited for the response. On the flagship of the Imperial fleet, Commander Prexital watched the broadcast with his officers. At first there was silence. Then someone laughed. Soon the entire bridge was filled with laughter. The idea that humans, primitive creatures who had barely learned to travel between stars, thought they could threaten the Empire was hilarious to them. Commander Prexital smiled, showing teeth that looked like shards of metal. He gave a simple order to his helmsmen. 3 of their dreadnoughts were to advance past the boundary that Earth had declared. They would fly close to Mars, showing these arrogant humans what real power looked like. Once the humans saw that their threats meant nothing, they would beg to surrender. Back in the command center on Earth, alarms began blaring. 3 massive ships were moving toward Mars. Admiral Patterson watched the displays, his expression calm. Around him, officers waited for orders, their fingers hovering over controls they had trained with for years but never actually used in combat. President Webb stood beside the Admiral. He asked if they were ready. Patterson nodded slowly. Everything they had built, all the years of secret preparation, came down to this moment. If the Prometheus array worked as designed, they had a chance. If it did not, Earth was doomed. The 3 Imperial dreadnoughts crossed the defensive line. Admiral Patterson took a deep breath. Then he gave the order that would change the galaxy forever. He told Dr. Chang to activate the Prometheus array. Around the solar system, weapons that had waited silently in the dark began to hum with power. Across Earth, people held their breath and watched their screens, waiting to see if humanity's desperate gamble would save them or doom them all. The 3 Imperial dreadnoughts moved through space like massive predators, confident and unhurried. Each ship was over 3 kilometers long, bristling with weapons that had destroyed entire civilizations. On the bridge of the lead vessel, the captain laughed as he ordered his crew to charge their main guns. They would give these humans a show they would never forget. In the command center beneath Geneva, Dr. Linda Chang sat at her station with her hands steady on the controls. Around her, screens showed the positions of every Prometheus platform scattered through the solar system. The weapons had never been tested against real targets before. Everything they knew came from simulations and calculations. Now they would find out if those calculations were correct. Admiral Patterson gave the final authorization code. Dr. Chang entered the command sequence. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then across millions of kilometers of space, the Prometheus array came to life. 3 beams of pure white energy materialized instantly. They did not travel across space in the conventional sense. Because of the quantum targeting system, they existed at their target and their source at the same moment. The Imperial dreadnoughts had no time to raise shields or take evasive action. 1 second they were advancing confidently. The next second they simply ceased to exist. The explosions were visible from Earth even without telescopes. 3 new stars bloomed briefly in the sky, then faded. In the command center, nobody moved. They stared at their screens, watching the displays confirm what had happened. 3 direct hits, 3 complete kills. The Prometheus array worked exactly as designed. On Commander Prextal's flagship, chaos erupted. Officers shouted over each other, trying to understand what had just happened. Their sensors had detected energy signatures, but nothing that matched any known weapon type. The 3 dreadnoughts had not been damaged. They had been vaporized so completely that not even debris remained. Commander Prextal felt something he had not experienced in decades. Fear. He demanded answers from his weapons officers. How had the humans done this? What kind of weapon could bypass Imperial shields completely? Nobody had an explanation. Dr. Chang opened a communication channel directly to the Imperial flagship. Her face appeared on every screen in their command bridge. She spoke calmly, as if she were giving a lecture to students rather than explaining how she had just killed thousands of Imperial soldiers. She explained that the Prometheus weapons used quantum-locked targeting. The beams existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, striking targets through space-time itself. Imperial shields worked by deflecting energy in normal space. These weapons did not travel through normal space. By the time sensors detected them, the attack was already complete. There was no defense against them. Commander Prextal listened to her explanation with growing rage. This could not be possible. Humans were primitive. They had been given technology by the Empire, taught to build basic ships. How could they have developed something so advanced that the Empire itself did not possess it? His pride would not allow retreat, not yet. He ordered 50 of his cruisers to attack Earth directly. They would overwhelm these human weapons through sheer numbers. The Prometheus array could not possibly target 50 ships at once. The Imperial cruisers accelerated toward Earth, spreading out in a formation designed to divide enemy fire. Admiral Patterson watched them come. He turned to Dr. Chang and asked how many platforms they could fire simultaneously. She checked her systems and replied that all 43 platforms were operational. Each one could fire every 3 seconds. They had more than enough capacity. The battle that followed was not really a battle at all. It was a massacre. The Prometheus platforms began firing in sequence, targeting the closest Imperial ships first. Every 3 seconds, new beams lanced through space. Every 3 seconds, another Imperial cruiser exploded. The aliens tried to take evasive action, but it made no difference. The quantum targeting did not need to predict where targets would be. It simply struck them wherever they were. After 10 minutes, 25 Imperial cruisers were destroyed. The rest tried to retreat, but Admiral Patterson would not allow it. He had fought under the Empire's command before. He knew that any sign of mercy would be seen as weakness. If they let these ships escape, the Empire would just send more. They had to send a clear message. While the Prometheus array tore through the Imperial cruisers, human fighters launched from bases on the Moon and Mars. These were not the old fighters that Earth had built decades ago. They were new designs, equipped with miniaturized versions of the Prometheus technology. The weapons on these fighters could not destroy capital ships, but they were devastating against other fighters and small vessels. Squadron leader Danny Cruz led his wing of 12 fighters against a group of Imperial interceptors. The aliens outnumbered the humans 3-1, but numbers did not matter when one side had weapons the other could not defend against. Cruz's targeting computer painted enemy fighters on his display. He fired, and 6 Imperial ships exploded in rapid succession. His wingmen did the same. Within minutes, the entire Imperial fighter screen was gone. The battle lasted only 20 minutes from start to finish. When it was over, 50 Imperial cruisers were destroyed or disabled. Earth had not lost a single ship. The command center erupted in celebration. Officers hugged each other. Some people cried with relief. They had done it. They had actually defeated an Imperial attack force. Admiral Patterson did not join the celebration. He stood at his station, watching the display that showed the remaining Imperial ships. Over 100 vessels still surrounded Earth. They were not attacking, but they had not retreated either. He knew this was not over. Not by a long way. President Webb approached him quietly. He asked what the Admiral was thinking. Patterson replied that he was thinking about all the soldiers on those Imperial ships. Many of them were conscripts from other conquered species, forced to fight for the Empire just like humans had been forced. He had just killed thousands of people who probably never wanted to be there in the first place. The president placed a hand on Patterson's shoulder. He said that the admiral had done what was necessary. If they had not fought, millions of humans would have been taken as slaves. Sometimes there were no good choices, only terrible ones and slightly less terrible ones. On the Imperial flagship, Commander Prexital stared at the tactical displays in disbelief. Half his force destroyed in less than half an hour. This was impossible. The Zedrax Empire had not suffered such a defeat in 8,000 years. Not since the ancient wars that established their dominance over the galaxy. His communications officer informed him that they were receiving messages from across the galaxy. News of the battle had already spread. Other species were watching what happened here. Some were celebrating. Others were afraid. Everyone was shocked. Prexital knew he had to make a decision. He could order his remaining ships to attack, but that would likely result in more losses. The humans had proven their weapons worked, or he could retreat and face the shame of being the first Imperial commander in millennia to be defeated by a species the Empire considered primitive. In the end, survival won over pride. He ordered the fleet to withdraw beyond the boundary that Earth had declared. But before he left, he broadcast one final message. He swore that Earth had committed an act of war against the Zedrax Empire. This insult would not be forgotten or forgiven. The Emperor himself would hear of this defeat, and the response would be devastating. Humanity had won a battle, but they had started a war they could not possibly win. As the Imperial ships retreated, something unexpected happened. 3 of the smaller vessels broke formation. They moved slowly toward Earth, broadcasting surrender signals. Their crews, Dr. Chang explained, were not Zedrax. They were Valkesh, the same species that had made first contact with humanity 70 years ago. These ships had been forced into Imperial service, and now they were defecting. Admiral Patterson authorized their approach. The Valkesh ships docked at the human space station orbiting Earth. When their crews emerged, they knelt before the human officers who greeted them. They said they had waited generations for someone to stand up to the Empire. Earth had given them hope. They wanted to join humanity's fight. Ambassador Volkov met with the Valkesh captains personally. She told them that Earth did not want subjects or servants. If they were going to fight together, it would be as equals. The Valkesh accepted immediately. They had lived under tyranny long enough. The chance to be free again was worth any price. That night, celebrations erupted across Earth. People danced in the streets. Fireworks lit up the sky. For the first time in 70 years, humanity was truly free. They had stood up to the most powerful force in the galaxy and won. But in the command center, Admiral Patterson and President Webb shared a quiet moment. They both knew the celebrations would not last long. Commander Prexital's message had been clear. The Empire would return with overwhelming force. The real test was still to come. The Grand Fleet advanced in perfect formation, a wall of metal and death moving toward Earth. From the command center beneath Geneva, the Imperial vessels looked like a solid mass on the displays. Admiral Patterson stood at his station, his hands gripping the edge of the console. Around him, officers from Earth and allied species worked at their stations in tense silence. He opened a channel to all allied ships. His voice was calm and steady. He told them that today they would face the largest military force in galactic history. The odds were terrible. Many of them would not survive. But they were not fighting for victory alone. They were fighting so that future generations would know that someone stood against tyranny. They were fighting to prove that freedom was worth any cost. Lieutenant Sophie Grant sat at the tactical station, her screens showing fleet movements and predicted attack vectors. She was young, only 26, but she had proven to have an almost supernatural ability to predict enemy movements. Admiral Patterson relied on her analysis more than any computer simulation. She studied the Imperial formation and called out her assessment. The Empire would try to overwhelm them with numbers, hitting from multiple directions at once. Patterson ordered the Allied fleet to spread out in defensive positions throughout the solar system. The Prometheus array was their strongest weapon, but it could only cover certain areas. They had to force the Empire to come through those kill zones. The Allied ships moved into position, human vessels alongside Valkesh cruisers and Korth warships. For the first time in history, ships from dozens of different species operated as a single unified fleet. The Imperial fleet opened fire first. Thousands of energy beams and missiles streaked across space. The Alliance ships took evasive action, their shields flaring as they absorbed hits. Some were destroyed immediately, brilliant explosions marking where brave crews made their final stand. But the Allied vessels returned fire, and they had one advantage: the Prometheus weapons. Dr. Linda Chang activated the array from Earth. The platforms hidden throughout the solar system began firing in coordinated sequence. White beams of quantum-locked energy lanced across millions of kilometers. Imperial ships exploded in rapid succession, their shields useless against weapons that struck through multiple dimensions at once. In the first 5 minutes, over 100 Imperial vessels were destroyed, but the Empire had learned from their first encounter with Earth. Their newer ships carried quantum disruptors, experimental devices that could partially deflect the Prometheus beams. The weapons were still deadly, but now they needed multiple hits to destroy their targets. The battle that Admiral Patterson had hoped to win quickly turned into a brutal slugfest. Human fighters launched from bases on the Moon, Mars, and from carriers hidden in the asteroid belt. Squadron leader Danny Cruz led his wing into the thickest part of the fighting. His pilots flew with reckless courage, diving between massive capital ships to strike at vulnerable points. The miniaturized Prometheus weapons on their fighters were perfect for this kind of close-in combat. They darted around like wasps, impossible for the larger Imperial ships to track. Dr. Chang activated the Typhoon Protocol. Thousands of automated drones that had been waiting silently in the dark came to life. They moved as a single entity, coordinating through quantum entanglement. The swarm descended on an Imperial carrier group, each drone programmed to self-destruct against enemy shields. The explosions created cascading failures, gaps in the defenses that allowed Prometheus strikes to get through. 3 carriers were destroyed within minutes. The battle raged for hours. Space itself seemed to burn with weapons fire. On Earth, people watched from bunkers and shelters as the sky lit up with distant explosions. Some prayed, others simply held their loved ones and waited to see if they would live through the day. In the command center, Lieutenant Grant suddenly shouted a warning. She had spotted something in the Imperial fleet movements. A group of siege vessels was breaking away from the main force, moving toward Earth on a different trajectory. These were planet-killer ships, designed to crack worlds open from orbit. If even one of them got through, everything would be lost. Admiral Patterson immediately ordered all available forces to intercept. Captain Renelo responded from his Valkesh cruiser. He was closest to the siege vessels and could reach them first. Patterson ordered him to hold position and wait for reinforcements, but Renelo refused. There was no time. If the siege vessels got within range of Earth, millions would die. Ambassador Volkov was monitoring communications from the orbital station. She heard Renlo's transmission and her blood went cold. She opened a private channel to him, begging him not to do what she knew he was planning. Renlo's voice was gentle. He told her that he had spent 30 years serving an empire built on cruelty. Now finally, he had the chance to do something good, something that mattered. He said he loved her and signed off. Renlo's cruiser accelerated to maximum speed, aiming directly at the largest siege vessel. The Imperial ship tried to shoot him down, but Valkesh pilots were the best in the galaxy. He dodged through weapons fire, his ship taking hits but continuing forward. At the last second, he overloaded his reactor and rammed the siege vessel at full speed. The explosion was visible from Earth, a brief new sun that faded as quickly as it appeared. When it cleared, both ships were gone. The sacrifice bought time for reinforcements to arrive. Daxkor led a wing of Korth warships against the remaining siege vessels. The Korth fought with savage fury, their ships taking incredible damage but refusing to retreat. They destroyed 2 more siege vessels before Imperial fighters drove them back. But the threat was contained. The planet killers would not reach Earth. The battle continued for 3 days. Neither side could gain a decisive advantage. The Imperial numbers were overwhelming, but the Alliance fought with desperate courage and superior technology. Ships on both sides were destroyed by the hundreds. The space around Earth became a graveyard of twisted metal and frozen bodies. On the second day, Admiral Patterson's flagship, the Defiance, took a direct hit from an Imperial dreadnought. The blast tore through the hull, killing dozens of crew members and crippling the engines. Patterson ordered half the crew to evacuate while he stayed on the bridge to maintain command. Lieutenant Grant refused to leave, insisting that he needed her tactical analysis. Together, they continued coordinating the defense from a dying ship. President Webb watched everything from the command center, making impossible decisions. Dr. Chang presented him with a choice. They could redirect power from Earth cities to boost the Prometheus array, but it would leave millions without life support. Webb authorized it without hesitation. The people in the cities could survive a few hours without power. But if the fleet fell, everyone would die. On the third day, the turning point came. The Imperial fleet's logistics began to break down. They had expected to overwhelm Earth quickly. Instead, they had been fighting for 3 days straight. Their ships needed fuel, ammunition, and repairs. The Alliance, fighting in their home system, had supply lines that worked. The Empire did not. Lieutenant Grant spotted the weakness. She showed Admiral Patterson how Imperial ships were pulling back in rotation to resupply. If they could hit those supply vessels, they could cripple the entire fleet. Patterson immediately ordered all available forces to target the Imperial logistics ships. Squadron leader Cruz led his fighters on suicide runs against supply convoys. Dr. Chang redirected the Prometheus array to focus on the supply vessels rather than combat ships. The strategy worked. Within 6 hours, the Imperial fleet began to fall apart. Ships ran out of ammunition and fuel. Damaged vessels could not be repaired. The Emperor, watching from his flagship, realized with growing horror that his invincible Grand Fleet was losing to a coalition of rebels and primitives. He had one final card to play. His flagship, the Eternal Throne, was the most powerful ship ever built. It carried weapons that could destroy planets and shields that had never been breached. He ordered his ship forward, determined to personally oversee Earth's destruction. Daxkor saw the flagship advancing and knew what he had to do. He gathered his best warriors and launched a boarding action. Their assault ships attached to the Eternal Throne's hull like barnacles. The Korth cut through the armor with plasma torches and poured into the ship's corridors. They fought through deck after deck, facing the Emperor's elite guards in brutal close-quarters combat. While Daxkor's warriors kept the crew busy, the Prometheus array focused every available platform on the flagship. The quantum-locked beams struck again and again, slowly overwhelming even the Eternal Throne's powerful shields. The flagship began to break apart, massive sections of hull tearing away into space. The Emperor gave the order to retreat. The surviving Imperial ships turned and fled, abandoning their damaged vessels and leaving thousands of crew members behind. The Grand Fleet that had seemed unstoppable 3 days ago limped away in defeat, leaving behind wreckage and the knowledge that the Zedrax Empire was no longer invincible. On Earth, the command center erupted in exhausted celebration. They had done it. Against impossible odds, they had won. Admiral Patterson allowed himself a moment of relief before turning to the damage reports. News traveled fast across the galaxy. Faster-than-light communication networks carried the story of Earth's victory to thousands of star systems within hours. On worlds that had suffered under the Zedrax Empire for centuries, people gathered in secret to watch recordings of the battle. They saw human ships defeating Imperial vessels. They saw the mighty dreadnoughts explode. Most importantly, they saw that the Empire could be beaten. In the Korth systems where rebellion had been smoldering for decades, the news was like throwing fuel on a fire. Daxkor, the leader of the Korth resistance, watched the footage from Earth 3 times. Then he called his commanders together. They had been fighting a guerrilla war against the Empire for 20 years, hiding in asteroid fields and striking supply convoys. Now it was time to come out of the shadows. Within days, the Korth launched coordinated attacks against Imperial installations throughout their territory. They hit military bases, destroyed supply depots, and freed prisoners from labor camps. The Empire scrambled to respond, but they had never faced such organized resistance before. For the first time, the Korth were not just surviving. They were winning. The Talmori were a peaceful species who had been enslaved for 200 years. They had no weapons, no ships, no military tradition at all. But they had millions of workers in Imperial factories and mines. When they heard about Earth's defiance, something changed in them. On 17 different Talmori worlds, the slaves simply stopped working. They walked away from their machines and sat down in the streets. The Empire sent troops to force them back to work. But you cannot force millions of people to work if they refuse. The Imperial commanders could kill some as examples, and they did. But killing too many meant losing the workers they needed. The Talmori had discovered a weapon the Empire could not defend against: simple refusal. They would rather die than continue serving tyrants. Even the Valkesh, who had been loyal to the Empire for generations, began to turn. More Valkesh ships defected and made their way to Earth. They brought information about Imperial fleet movements. maps of military installations, and technical data on Imperial weapons. Each defection weakened the Empire a little more. President Webb watched these developments with a mixture of hope and concern. Hope because it meant Earth was not alone in its fight. Concern because every rebellion drew the Empire's attention. He knew the Emperor would not tolerate multiple uprisings. The response when it came would be brutal. He decided it was time to address not just humanity but the entire galaxy. Ambassador Volkov helped him prepare the speech. They broadcast it on every channel they could access, using Valkesh communication networks to reach Imperial-controlled space. President Webb spoke directly to the camera, knowing that billions would hear his words. He said that Earth's fight was not just about humanity. It was about the fundamental right of all sentient beings to be free. The Zedrax Empire claimed the right to rule through strength, but real strength came from choosing to stand together against oppression. He offered an alliance to any species willing to fight for their freedom. Earth would share its technology and its resources. But more than that, Earth would stand beside them as equals. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Messages poured in from rebel groups across the galaxy. Some wanted weapons, others wanted military training or strategic advice. All of them wanted hope, and Earth had become the symbol of that hope. Ambassador Volkov began traveling secretly to rebel-held territories. She met with Dax Kor on a frozen moon in the Korth systems. The rebel leader was different from what she expected. He was massive, nearly 3 meters tall with blue-gray skin and 4 arms. But his eyes showed intelligence and determination. They talked for hours about strategy, about coordination, about building something that could last beyond the war. Together, they created the Free Systems Alliance. It was not a hierarchy with Earth at the top. It was a coalition of equals where each species contributed what they could. The Korth provided warriors and combat experience. The Talmori offered their industrial knowledge and organizational skills. The Valkesh shared their familiarity with Imperial tactics. Humanity contributed the Prometheus technology and tactical innovation. Dr. Linda Chang worked around the clock to expand production of Prometheus weapons. The platforms that defended Earth were powerful, but building more required rare materials and precise manufacturing. She developed a smaller version that could be mounted on ships. These weapons were not as powerful as the fixed platforms, but they were still far beyond anything the Empire used. She also created something new, the Typhoon Protocol. These were automated drones, each one about the size of a small car. Individually, they were not dangerous, but they could coordinate their actions through quantum entanglement, moving as a single swarm. Thousands of them working together could overwhelm even the largest capital ships. Admiral Patterson spent his time training the Allied forces. Ships from the Free Systems Alliance began arriving at Earth for joint exercises. He discovered that each species had different strengths. The Korth were aggressive and fearless, but sometimes lacked discipline. The Valkesh were excellent pilots, but too cautious. The Talmori had no combat experience, but learned quickly. Patterson worked to blend these different styles into a cohesive fighting force. One of the Valkesh captains, a pilot named Renlo, impressed Patterson particularly. Renlo had served in the Imperial Navy for 30 years before defecting. He knew Imperial tactics inside and out. Patterson promoted him to squadron commander and put him in charge of training Valkesh defectors. Ambassador Volkov and Captain Renlo spent more and more time together. At first, it was purely professional, but something deeper developed between them. Despite being from different species, they found they shared similar values and experiences. Both had lost family to Imperial cruelty. Both were fighting not for revenge, but for a better future. Their relationship became a symbol of what the alliance represented. Different peoples coming together not through conquest, but through mutual respect. While the alliance grew stronger, the Empire mobilized for war. Deep in Imperial space, the Emperor himself took command. He was ancient, having ruled for over 3,000 years through a combination of advanced technology and brutal efficiency. He had crushed 1,000 rebellions before. This one would be no different. He ordered the Grand Fleet assembled. 5,000 warships, including planet-killer siege vessels and carriers holding tens of thousands of fighters. It was the largest military force ever gathered in galactic history. The fleet would travel to Earth, destroy it completely, and then systematically hunt down every rebel world. The Emperor would make the cost of defiance so terrible that no species would ever dare resist again. Earth's long-range sensors detected the fleet's movements weeks before it would arrive. The news spread through the Alliance like a cold wind. 5,000 ships. Even with the Prometheus array and the combined forces of the Free Systems Alliance, they had perhaps 300 vessels. The numbers were overwhelming. President Webb called an emergency meeting of the Alliance leadership. Representatives from 24 species gathered, some in person, others through holographic projection. The mood was grim. Several representatives suggested evacuating Earth, taking what they could and fleeing to the outer systems. They could continue fighting as guerrillas, striking from the shadows. Admiral Patterson stood and rejected that plan immediately. If they ran now, the Alliance would collapse. Every species that had joined them had done so because Earth stood and fought. If Earth fled, it would prove the Empire right, that resistance was futile, that freedom was not worth the cost. They had to make their stand here, regardless of the odds. Daxcor agreed. He said the Korth had been running and hiding for 20 years. It had gained them nothing but more suffering. It was time to stand and fight, to show the Empire that some things were worth dying for. A Telmori representative, speaking for her people, said that her species had been slaves for 2 centuries. They had forgotten what freedom felt like. Earth had reminded them. If they had to die to stay free, at least they would die as free beings rather than as property. The vote was unanimous. The Alliance would defend Earth with everything they had. Ships from allied species began arriving daily, taking up positions throughout the solar system. Dr. Chang worked with engineers from a dozen species to expand the Prometheus array and deploy the Typhoon drones. Admiral Patterson drilled the combined fleet relentlessly, preparing for the battle they all knew was coming. On the last night before the Grand Fleet arrived, Ambassador Volkov walked through the observation deck of the orbital station with Captain Renlo. They looked down at Earth, the blue and green planet that had become the symbol of resistance for the entire galaxy. Renlo said he never imagined he would die defending a human world. Volkov replied that she never imagined she would fall in love with an alien. They held hands, knowing that the next day might be their last. The Grand Fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel at the edge of the solar system. 5,000 ships materialized, blotting out the stars. On Earth, alarms sounded. In the command center, President Webb stood beside Admiral Patterson. In the weeks following the Battle of Sol, the galaxy changed in ways no one had thought possible. News of the Empire's defeat spread faster than the Imperial propaganda machine could contain it. On worlds that had been conquered centuries ago, people began to believe that freedom was actually possible. Rebellions that had been suppressed flared up again, stronger than before. The Free Systems Alliance grew daily. Species that had been too afraid to resist now sent representatives to Earth. Some came seeking weapons and military aid. Others wanted guidance on how to organize resistance movements. All of them came seeking hope, and Earth provided it freely. President Marcus Webb understood that winning the battle was only the beginning. Building something lasting would be much harder than tearing down the old order. He called together representatives from every species in the Alliance. The meeting took place in a hastily constructed assembly hall in orbit around Earth. Over 100 different species attended, some breathing oxygen, others requiring different atmospheres. The technology required to make such a gathering possible was itself a marvel. Webb stood before the assembly and spoke carefully. He said that Earth had not fought the Empire just to replace one tyranny with another. The Alliance could not become the thing they had defeated. He proposed creating a true federation, where every species had an equal voice regardless of size or military power. One species, one vote. Decisions would be made collectively, not imposed from above. The proposal sparked intense debate. Some species argued that Earth had earned the right to lead through combat. Others worried that giving everyone equal votes would make decision-making impossible. But Webb was firm. He had seen what happened when one group claimed superiority over others. That path led only to suffering. After 3 days of discussion, the Galactic Federation was born. The founding document guaranteed the sovereignty of every member species. No world could be forced to join. No world could be forced to stay. The Federation existed to protect its members and promote cooperation, not to rule over them. It was an imperfect system, but it was better than anything the galaxy had seen before. Admiral Jake Patterson spent the months after the battle doing something unexpected. Instead of pressing the advantage against the weakened Empire, he focused on offering surrender terms to Imperial forces. Many people thought he was being too soft. They wanted revenge for all the suffering the Empire had caused. But Patterson remembered that many Imperial soldiers were conscripts, forced to fight just like he had been. He sent messages to Imperial fleets across the galaxy, offering them a choice. Surrender and join the Federation, or continue fighting for an empire that had abandoned them. Many Imperial commanders were shocked by the terms. They expected to be executed or imprisoned. Instead, they were offered forgiveness and a place in the new order. Hundreds of Imperial ships accepted. Some crews defected as complete units, bringing their vessels with them. Others simply stopped fighting and went home to worlds that were no longer under Imperial control. The Empire's military began to dissolve from within, not from defeat but from loss of purpose. Dr. Linda Chang found herself in an unexpected position. The woman who had designed weapons of terrible power was now being asked to lead the Federation Science Council. She accepted reluctantly, seeing it as a chance to use her knowledge for better purposes. She began working on faster-than-light engines that would allow exploration beyond the old Imperial borders. She also developed medical technology to help species that had been neglected under Imperial rule. The Prometheus technology that had won the war was carefully controlled. Chang refused to share the complete designs with anyone, knowing how dangerous the weapons could be in the wrong hands. But she did provide defensive versions to Federation members, shields based on the same quantum principles. If the Empire ever attacked again, the Federation would be ready. Ambassador Kira Volkov threw herself into diplomatic work, trying to fill the void left by Captain Renlo's death. She traveled constantly, negotiating treaties with former Imperial allies and mediating disputes between Federation members. The work was exhausting but necessary. Building trust between species that had been enemies for centuries was not easy. Not everyone on Earth supported the new Federation. A political movement arose calling itself Humanity First. They argued that Earth had earned the right to rule through superior technology and military victory. Why should humans share power with species that had been unable to free themselves? These voices grew louder as months passed and the costs of maintaining the Federation became clear. President Webb confronted these voices directly in a speech to the Terran Council. He spoke bluntly about the danger of becoming what they had fought against. The Zedrax Empire had started with similar beliefs, thinking their strength gave them the right to rule. That path led to 8,000 years of tyranny. If humanity followed it, they would betray everything their victory was supposed to mean. The speech was controversial, but it worked. The Humanity First movement lost support rapidly. Most people understood that Earth's strength came not from standing alone, but from standing together with allies. The Federation continued to grow. Meanwhile, deep in Imperial space, the Emperor was not finished. Driven mad by defeat, he gathered what remained of his loyal forces. He no longer cared about ruling the galaxy. He only wanted revenge. He launched one final desperate attack against Earth, throwing everything he had left into one last assault. The attack was savage but disorganized. Imperial ships that once moved in perfect formation now attacked in scattered waves. Sophie Grant, now a captain of her own ship, used the confusion to her advantage. She outmaneuvered the Imperial forces, predicting their moves and setting ambushes. The battle was short but brutal. When it ended, the Emperor's flagship was surrounded. Admiral Patterson personally led the boarding party that captured the Emperor. They found him on his throne, ancient and bitter, refusing to admit defeat even as his ship fell apart around him. Patterson offered him the chance to surrender. The Emperor spat curses instead. He would never bow to primitives and rebels. The Emperor was taken to Earth to stand trial. The trial was broadcast across the galaxy, a symbolic moment showing that justice applied to everyone. Representatives from species the Empire had oppressed testified about atrocities committed over thousands of years. The Emperor sat in silence, his arrogance finally broken by the weight of evidence against him. The verdict was guilty on all counts. But the sentence was not execution. The Federation Council decided that the Emperor would spend the rest of his extraordinarily long life in prison, watching the galaxy flourish without him. Death would have been mercy. Living to see his empire replaced by something better was true justice. 5 years after the Battle of Sol, the Galactic Federation thrived. Over 300 systems had joined. The old imperial territories were being rebuilt under democratic governance. Trade flourished. Scientific knowledge was shared freely. Former enemies worked together on projects that benefited everyone. Admiral Patterson retired from active military service. He accepted a position teaching at the new Federation Naval Academy, training officers from dozens of different species. His classes were legendary. He taught tactics and strategy, but also something more important, that the best weapon was often diplomacy, and the strongest defense was trust between allies. Dr. Chang continued leading the Science Council, working on ambitious projects. The Federation began terraforming dead worlds, creating new homes for species displaced by imperial wars. They cured diseases that had plagued entire civilizations. They explored regions of space beyond the old imperial borders, discovering wonders that had been hidden for millennia. President Webb served his final term and stepped down, satisfied that the Federation would outlive him. He had come to power during humanity's darkest hour and led them through war. Now he could rest, knowing that the galaxy was better than he had found it. Sophie Grant became one of the youngest admirals in Federation history, proving that courage and intelligence mattered more than age or experience. Ambassador Volkov spent her later years writing. She compiled a complete history of the war, from the first imperial ultimatum to the founding of the Federation. She made sure future generations would understand the cost of freedom. Every name of every person who died fighting for liberation was recorded. They would not be forgotten. She also wrote extensively about Captain Renlo and their relationship. She wanted people to know that the Federation was built not just on military victory, but on personal connections between beings from different worlds. Love, friendship, and mutual respect had proven stronger than ancient hatreds. 10 years after Earth had declared its independence, a ceremony was held at the memorial built in orbit around Earth. The structure was vast, with walls covered in the names of everyone who died in the war. Representatives from every Federation member attended. They stood together in silence, remembering the cost of what they had built. Dax Kor, now an elder statesman of the Korth, spoke at the ceremony. He said that his people had fought for 20 years before Earth joined the struggle. In all that time, they had won battles but never believed they could win the war. Earth changed that.